Welcome everyone to Creating a Welcoming Class. My name is Hannah Rogers, and with me today is my colleague Randy Riddle. We are consultants with Duke Learning Innovation, and this is the first part of our inclusive teaching workshop series this fall. More events will be posted on our calendar soon. Today we have 4 learning objectives. First, we want to consider why setting a welcoming tone for your class is important. Then we'll identify some instructional strategies to create an inclusive and accessible course. We want you to be able to share your ideas with each other about how you can set a tone for diversity, equity, and mutual respect in your course, and have the opportunity to brainstorm concrete ideas for your first day of class. As you came in, you saw the question, why is it important to have a welcoming class? So if you want to take a few minutes and think about that and type your answers in the chat, we will just open with that, and I'll read out some answers as they get posted. So we have one response that students need to feel safe and welcome if they're going to be able to be fully present and learn, absolutely, to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to learn in that environment. And a student who feels excluded won't be productive, absolutely. If you're, does anyone else have any ideas before we transition to the beginning of this presentation? Awesome, yeah. So it seems like everyone's thoughts were pretty united there. So you're all exactly right. I thought that it would be good to kind of kick this off with a quote from the Duke Accessible Syllabus Project, which is a website here that I put in chat, and it was made by members of the Duke community to think about how we can create more accessible, inclusive courses. And they say in their general principles, it is our society, not the individual or student, who has the ethical obligation to create the conditions for inclusivity, extending to the educational institution, the instructor, and the curricula. And what I really like about this quote is that it emphasizes that we're all responsible for creating an equitable and inclusive and accessible environment. And I really like to think about creating classes as a model for, respectful behavior and create an atmosphere where we can all learn. So I think that all of you have kind of echoed some of these thoughts in the chat already. So we're going to start out by thinking about some ways that you can create a welcoming course before students even set foot into your classroom. And one of these ways is with student surveys. You might send this out a week before class, a few days before, even within the first week. And this is something that's really important because you can use the information you get from these surveys to figure out how you can configure your class to impact student learning positively. So for example, you might have used these last year to try and figure out where student time zones were if you were teaching virtually. You might use these to figure out student background in the survey matter or their interests. You might ask about accessibility requests. I'm putting a link into the chat to something called Accessible Teaching in the Time of COVID-19, which has a wide range of models about how you can design your survey. And so it not only helps you see where students are coming from and how you can adjust your course, but also sort of let students know from the beginning that you're willing to be responsive toward them, listen to them, and set up different ways for them to communicate. So thinking along those lines, something else that you can do before students even step foot in your classroom is make sure that you start thinking about accessibility before someone requests an individual accommodation. And one way that you can do this is by creating accessible materials. So on this slide, I have a picture of Microsoft Word because it has a check accessibility tool. Other tools have accessibility functionality built in. Sakai's editor actually has a check accessibility icon that you can use to check to see if what you're posting in the editor has any accessibility problems. So you know, if you think about accessible materials, it's one way of acknowledging to students that you care about their ability to access the material. And it's also good for students, even if they don't have a disability necessarily. Things like having captions and videos can be really helpful to everyone. For example, English as a second language students really appreciate them, or students who just want to read or might have misunderstood something in the video. That's really helpful. Along similar lines, you might think about what course tools you're using, because inaccessible tools and materials will create barriers to learning. So Duke support tools like Sakai and Zoom here pictured on the screen are ADA compliant. But if you want to use third-party tools, you might think about whether or not they meet those accessibility standards, and also ask vendors what they're doing to make sure their tools are accessible. And I think it's also noteworthy to think about what tools you're using and how many you're using, because students can get a little overwhelmed. So to take us to the next point, creating a student-centered syllabus is really important in how you design your class. Student-centered syllabi are those that lay out the foundations for an equitable and accessible learning and experience. So we want to take a few minutes and ask, what does a student-centered syllabus look like to you? I have a Google Doc that I will post in the chat. Everybody should be able to edit this. So if you just want to go follow that link and type in your ideas in the chat, will take a few minutes and we can brainstorm what a student-centered syllabus looks like to you. And let me know if you need help with editing access, but it should be there.
Oh, I see.
It seems like typing slowed a little, so I'll just give it one more minute for everyone to wrap up. Any final thoughts or any final plus ones? Okay, great. It looks like we have a lot of really great responses. So,
Looks like I can't show it. Sorry about that.
oh, that's good. So I noticed that some of you said this idea of a student-centered syllabus is new to you, but some of you like talked about learning objectives or being extremely transparent about what students will use in the course. And that is absolutely something that we like to promote, having content-driven learning goals, having a roadmap for success. Some of you mentioned just general clarity as well, or reinforcing the information found on the syllabus on a course webpage. Being inclusive, using welcoming inclusive language, absolutely. One thing Learning Innovation likes to suggest is writing things from a community standpoint, like using we instead of I or you. You also had some other great ideas about encouraging students to reach out, providing resources about where they can go for help, explaining policies. This is all really great. So there are some benefits besides just being student-centered. Like why do we do this? What are the benefits of this? And some of the benefits of a student-centered syllabus are that it's good for both the students and you, and that it creates an inclusive environment. It's transparent. But for you, it also demonstrates good teaching. It helps lay out to students what they need to know. Brandy, could we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. And it sets students up for success, and it builds like a partnership where there's a positive perception of the instructor. And also, since you have those learning objectives and outcomes that are very clear, it also can improve upon those. So there are a lot of really good reasons to have a student-centered syllabus, especially in that it will help you create a more equitable classroom. And now that we've talked a little bit more about the student-centered, now that we've talked about the student-centered syllabus, I'm going to hand it over to Randy, who's going to talk a little bit more about specific policies and some things you can do that really parallel what you put in the Google Doc.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. So I like to think of a student-centered syllabus as really an opportunity. Usually when we think of a syllabus, it's kind of outlining the course, and it's kind of telling the students things about the course and what will happen in the class with your tests and assignments. And a big part of that are policies. So it's really a student-centered syllabus is a way for you to put yourself in the position of your students taking a class and asking yourself, well, why am I taking this class? Why should I be interested in it? Will I feel welcome in the class? And the policies are a part of that overall mix. Usually we think about course policies as these sort of legalistic things almost, where you're allowed so many absences, and if this bad thing happens, this will result. But it's really an opportunity to set a tone for what your class is going to be like and what the relationship is going to be like between you and the students and between the students themselves. So you can set a tone by talking about accessibility in your class. You can set a tone by talking about the flexibility of your policies and the kind of communication you can do with students if there are absences or other kinds of extenuating circumstances that are beyond the control of the student or even you or the university. It's also an opportunity for you to address student privacy. For example, that could mean the situations where anonymous comments are allowed. If you're teaching online, then when should your cameras be on or off, and how we will respect your privacy. But also things like student copyright. Students own the copyright on the work they create when they're at the university. If you want to reuse that, will you ask them permission? It shows that you're concerned about their role in the class and the overall atmosphere of mutual respect. So it's the policies themselves, even though they're kind of dry and kind of cumbersome sometimes, if you approach them as if you're a student and think about it in their shoes, it's an opportunity to reiterate a inclusive, respectful environment for everyone. So one of the ways that you can encourage this atmosphere is putting an inclusivity, accessibility statement in your syllabus. It can show that you have a concern for all of your students and an atmosphere of equity and fairness, not only in your class, but in the context of your department and your school, as the kinds of behaviors that we want to pursue to create a community of learners. You can personalize statements to show that you have thought about this, and it's not some boilerplate language, that you're putting it in the context of your class, your department, your subject, and the kind of here and now of where your class is and where your students are. So here is a diversity statement, inclusivity statement, and I would like you to take just a moment and read over that, just so you get an idea of what one looks like. And if you have any thoughts on it, feel free to put them in the chat. So we have a couple of comments in the chat. Linda mentioned that the religious holidays issue is an important one, and that's certainly true. A lot of people forget about that. There are other kinds of things you could include too that maybe have context in the subject matter of the class, or events that are going on around campus or around the community or even nationally, or things that have to do with things going on in your discipline, in your department, with encouraging diversity. So all of these things can play into a kind of personalized statement that you can put in your syllabus. And this, again, is a way to encourage students to create an atmosphere of mutual respect and learning in your class. Okay. So there are other ways to establish an inclusive environment in your syllabus. That can be with the language that you use, using the pronouns that you prefer, and encouraging your students to do so as well. If you'll notice here in Zoom, we have this set up in our preferences. If you go to duke.zoom.us, you can have Zoom display your pronouns next to your name. This is a way to let people know that this is an expected behavior, and you're welcome to use the pronouns you prefer. You could also think about content warnings if it's appropriate for your class, and dealing with some kinds of difficult subject matter that may make some students feel uncomfortable. Perhaps it's historical material with really outdated kinds of viewpoints in it, or very controversial political material. But even sometimes kind of graphic material that might be in literature can be a problem for students who might still be dealing with, say, a past trauma that might have to do with violence or some other kind of thing as well. And really, this shows your students that you're going to respect if they have some issues they need to kind of take time out for and just think about when dealing with material in your class. And again, encouraging students, if they are having a difficult time with the class, give them the freedom to just take a step back and take a breath and think a little bit so that they can deal with the material. Hannah just put a link in the chat to some information on trauma-informed pedagogy. We're also going to send out these links to you at the end of the session as well, so you can look at them later as you're thinking about your class. Academic integrity is a big area to think about when you're putting together your syllabus and starting out your class. That how you handle academic integrity can be a model for your students as they become professionals. They may, you may need to get your students to think about citation practices and how it works in your discipline, keeping in mind that we're dealing with an international group of students and students from very many different backgrounds who may not have had the kind of training that other students have had about how to cite materials, how plagiarism works, and that kind of thing. They might not have had that background before, particularly if they're freshmen or sophomores, and you might need to provide some extra material on that to kind of define the boundaries of that, and particularly how that works in your discipline, because it can vary depending on what discipline that you're in. Academic integrity is something to stress, to show how it's not only an expected behavior here at Duke, but it can demonstrate that it's something important to you and can be important to the students later on in their professional career and their further career here at Duke. Providing examples of academic integrity to your students. Yes, Brenda had a good point, making it clear when you're doing group projects, what parts they should work on alone and what they should do together. How, if students are helping each other study or helping each other out with their papers, what's appropriate to help each other out with and what isn't. So just keep those things in mind. Again, it's setting this tone of behaviors for respect and mutual help with learning. So I would like you to, we've talked about several ideas having to do with your syllabus and policies. And I would like you to think about this question for a minute. What is one course policy change you can make in your class that would help foster an inclusive and equitable environment? Just think about that question and type some answers into the chat. Or if you prefer, I'll open it up for individuals to give their ideas. And that's to use discussion guidelines. This is basically a kind of one-page handout where you set some guidelines for discussion in your class. You introduce this on the first day of class, and you ask for feedback from the students and have them help modify your discussion guidelines so that they feel comfortable with it as a learning community. And then in subsequent classes, you bring up the discussion guidelines, just remind everyone of them before you start the class a few times until everyone is very familiar with the fact that this is the community standard we're going to use in the class. And you can proceed after that. And if there are issues later on in the class, you can refer back to these and talk with individual students about why this doesn't work with our community standard. We want to strive for a better behavior and more respect with each other. So one of the links we'll send you at the end of this session is to this blog post that we have here at Learning Innovation that has some examples of guidelines that you could use and adapt for your own course. And we've used these in some multi-day workshops that we've done, and faculty have found them useful in their own classes as well. So that's another thing you could do on the very first day of class. It doesn't take 5-10 minutes to introduce this and use it, but it can make a big difference in the overall tone in your class discussions and even how students work with each other. It kind of makes them responsible to each other in the class.